There comes a point in life when silence becomes more comfortable than any attempt at explanation. It's that moment when you feel that no matter how hard you try to put it into words, no one will understand the pain that made you withdraw. So you stop justifying, you stop insisting, and you learn to protect yourself. Sometimes this happens so subtly that even you are surprised to realize how much you've changed. Suddenly you no longer respond with the same haste. You no longer insist on conversations that always end the same way. You no longer offer your heart on a platter to those who hold it carelessly, and little by little, people start saying you've become cold, proud, difficult to deal with. But deep down, no one imagines how much you're just trying to survive. This is the silent face of someone who has been disappointed too many times. It's not arrogance or disdain, it's exhaustion. It's the emotional body saying enough after so many failed attempts to be understood. It's the heart building a kind of invisible armor, not for pleasure, but out of necessity. Because those who feel too much need to learn to protect themselves or end up shattering in every relationship that doesn't reciprocate the same care they offer. And the curious thing is that this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, gradual, almost imperceptible. It's as if, with each wound, you're adding a new layer of silence to yourself. And one day, when you realize it, you're no longer the person who was constantly explaining themselves. Some people confuse this with indifference. But the truth is that indifference is the absence of feeling. And what dwells within those who protect themselves is the opposite. It is the presence of a deep, intense feeling that has learned to withdraw because the world did not know how to handle its intensity. It's like a flower that closes its petals, not because it has given up on the light, but because it has learned to wait for the right sun to open again. And perhaps that's where everything gets confused, because the world has become accustomed to judging what it doesn't understand. When someone shuts down, few stop to think about the reason. Few wonder what happened before the silence. Carl Jung said that what we deny subdues us, what we accept transforms us, and perhaps that's why many don't understand those who choose to withdraw. Because in a society that values excess of speech, of exposure, of contact, withdrawal is seen as a flaw, not as a healing process. But those who have been hurt know withdrawal is sometimes the only way to continue existing without losing oneself. It's when you understand that silence is also an answer, that withdrawal is also a form of care, that not being present in certain places is, in fact, a way to remain whole. There is immense strength in not reacting, and that's something few people realize, because the natural impulse of someone who is emotionally sensitive is to want to explain, to want to resolve things, to want to prove that their intentions were pure. But there comes a point where the need to defend oneself dissolves into the peace of simply protecting oneself. And it is at this point that pride is born, not as vanity but as a boundary. It's the healthy ego saying, I don't need to hurt myself to be understood. And this awareness is liberating, but it hurts. It hurts because at first it feels like loneliness. It feels like rejection. You find yourself surrounded by silences, by judging glances, by unexplained distances, and your heart screams inside, I'm not cold. I'm just tired of giving myself to those who don't realize what they have in their hands. And that's where the deepest point of this journey lies. The learning that protecting yourself isn't about distancing yourself from love. It's about getting closer to self-love. Because there comes a moment when you realize you can't keep begging for what should already be natural: respect, reciprocity, care. But look, this doesn't mean closing your heart forever. It means learning to open the right windows. It's understanding that not everyone deserves the same access to your soul, that there are parts of you that can only flourish in the presence of someone with a gentle touch and a kind gaze. And this isn't pride, it's discernment, it's emotional maturity, it's the beginning of a new awareness. And it's curious how time teaches this silently. At first you blame yourself. You think maybe you were too cold, that you could have insisted a little more, that maybe, if you had explained better, things would have been different. But then you realize that the peace you feel today is worth more than any justification from the past, that the price of remaining in places where you need to diminish yourself to be accepted is too high, and that, however difficult it may be, distancing yourself is often the greatest act of love to yourself. There is a profound beauty in this kind of strength. It is discreet, yet transformative. It is the kind that needs no audience, no approval. It is a strength that comes from the depths of the soul, from those who have cried enough to understand that some battles are no longer worth fighting. And however much the world still tries to interpret this as pride, those who live this experience know that there is something much more sacred behind it. It is self-protection. It is the instinct of the soul, preserving what remains of light within. And this is where the central point of Jung's vision comes in. He believed that the human unconscious is wise, that it creates defense mechanisms when consciousness is unable to cope with pain. And perhaps that's exactly what happens when you start to shut down. It's not a rational act, it's a natural movement of the unconscious, trying to preserve your emotional integrity. It's as if your psyche is saying, you've been hurt enough. Now it's time to take care of the scars. And this process, although invisible, is profoundly transformative. When you understand this, something changes within you. You begin to look at yourself with more compassion. You understand that there is nothing wrong with distancing yourself, with saying no, with choosing silence. Because true emotional growth doesn't come from constant exposure, but from the ability to respect your own limits. And little by little, what once seemed like pride reveals itself as wisdom. A silent wisdom, built with tears, pauses, and new beginnings. And it is at this point that Jung invites us to reflect on the true origin of this attitude. It is not disinterest, it is not coldness, it is not pride, it is self-protection. It is the reflection of a soul that has learned, at the cost of pain, that not all love is safe, and that before opening up again, it is necessary to rebuild oneself. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized these words. Perhaps you saw yourself in this silence, in this desire to protect what little tenderness remains within you. And before continuing, I want to invite you to something simple, yet profound. If this theme resonates with what you've experienced, if you've ever felt that your pride was, in fact, a way of defending yourself, share that in the comments. Write in your own way, without fear of exposing yourself too much. This space is for that, for people who feel, reflect, and seek to understand themselves. And if you're not yet part of the channel, subscribe. That way you can walk alongside me on this journey of self-knowledge and soul, where each video is a mirror that helps us understand a little more about who we are and why we feel the way we do. Now, returning to our topic, there is something profoundly human about protecting oneself. Self-protection is like an emotional cocoon. It is where the soul retreats to recover after storms. And although from the outside it may seem cold, inside it is a healing process. Jung believed that the unconscious organizes itself to maintain psychic equilibrium, and that every emotional defense has a purpose. When someone withdraws, avoids certain subjects, or chooses silence, there is an unconscious attempt to preserve their own inner structure. It is the psychic instinct for survival, the same one that causes a wound on the body to form a scab until it heals. The problem is that we live in a world that judges others' behavior too quickly, but rarely seeks to understand the reason behind it. When someone withdraws, they immediately say they got proud. When they don't respond, they're full of themselves. When they withdraw, they lost interest. But nobody asks what happened before that. And perhaps this is one of the most subtle pains of those who live in this state, being misunderstood. Because behind the silence there are stories, there is exhaustion, there are attempts that were not recognized. There is someone who gave everything they could and yet was made to feel that it wasn't enough. And it is at this point that self-protection ceases to be a shield against the world and becomes an embrace of oneself. When you protect yourself, you are saying to your own heart, I listen to you, I respect you, I will no longer expose you where you are hurt. And this gesture, which seems simple, is one of the greatest acts of self-love that someone can practice. It is the beginning of a new awareness, where the focus shifts from pleasing others to respecting one's own limits. Jung spoke a lot about individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. And this path inevitably involves moments of introspection, because there's no way to find yourself while always looking outward, seeking approval, trying to fit into expectations that don't correspond to your own essence. Sometimes it's necessary to step away to listen to yourself, and this step away, when it comes from a place of self-care, is sacred. It doesn't break, it restores. It doesn't distance, it reorganizes. Think about how many times you've remained silent, not because you had nothing to say, but because you understood that speaking would be useless. How many times have you chosen to withdraw, not out of contempt, but because you realized that persisting would only hurt you again? These moments, though painful, mark the beginning of a new kind of strength. A strength that doesn't need to be loud to be real. It is silent, but firm. It is the strength that sustains you when the world doesn't understand your choice. And the curious thing is that over time, this force changes the way you relate to others. You start to observe more and react less. You begin to realize that not all silence is emptiness, and not all absence is a lack of interest. Sometimes it's just a time to reorganize your own inner universe. It's a necessary interval between one act of giving and another, because those who feel deeply need pauses. They need to breathe before opening their hearts again. And it is precisely in this process that self-protection transforms into emotional wisdom. You stop reacting impulsively, you stop defending yourself from everything, and you begin to choose where it is worthwhile to open up. This choice does not come from fear, but from awareness. You understand that you no longer need to prove yourself, and when this understanding matures, pride dissolves. It gives way to the serenity of someone who knows their own worth. But this transition isn't easy. There are days when your heart still wants to chase after you, still wants to explain, still wants to resolve things. There are days when you miss what you left behind, even knowing it was necessary. And that's when the process becomes deeper, because protecting yourself isn't about erasing love. It's about learning to love in a different way, without negating yourself. It's understanding that sometimes distance is the only way to continue feeling, without losing yourself. Jung said that everything we repress comes back in some way, and that's why silence also needs to be listened to. Self-protection cannot become a permanent wall. It needs to be a temporary shelter, a space where you recover, but from which at some point you also allow yourself to leave. Because when protection becomes a prison, it stops healing and starts isolating. And that was never the purpose. The purpose is to find balance, knowing how to open up without exposing yourself too much, knowing how to feel without hurting yourself completely. And balance comes with time. It comes with falls, with disappointments, with the days when you realize you closed yourself off too much and lost something beautiful out of fear. But it also comes with the days when you are grateful for having protected yourself, because it saved you from something that could have destroyed you. This is the duality of the human heart. It wants to open up, but it also wants to preserve itself. And living is learning to balance these two impulses without losing yourself in the process. Perhaps that's why Jung insisted so much on the idea that self-knowledge is a path of integration, not denial. You don't need to deny what you feel, nor force yourself to always be vulnerable. You just need to recognize the moments when it's time to retreat and the moments when it's safe to trust again. That's emotional maturity. That's knowing how to listen to your own soul. And when that awareness awakens, life begins to change. You stop constantly wanting to explain who you are, what you feel, why you distanced yourself, and you begin to feel at peace with the simple fact of knowing that you are taking care of yourself, because those who understand their own pain no longer need anyone's approval to validate themselves. Self-protection, then, ceases to be merely a response to injury and transforms into a more conscious way of living. It's when you learn to put your heart first, not as a shield, but as a compass. And this compass guides you away from what wears you down and closer to what nourishes you. And it's at this point that everything starts to make sense. Because little by little, you realize that the people who truly love you don't distance themselves because you've been protecting yourself. They wait, they understand, they respect your time. And when you feel safe again, love flows once more. Only this time, in a more mature, more conscious, lighter way. Ultimately, protecting yourself isn't the same as shutting yourself off forever. It's simply a pause between what hurt you and what's yet to come. It's the time your soul needs to remember how beautiful it is to trust again. There's a moment on the path to healing when you realize you no longer need to hide completely, that it's possible to protect yourself and still remain open to life. That's the moment when the weight of the armor begins to bother you more than the memory of the wounds. And that's when something begins to silently transform within you. The heart, little by little, understands that it wasn't made only to defend itself. It was also made to feel, to live, to connect. And that true strength lies not in locking yourself away, but in knowing when to open up and when to retreat. Jung said that every shadow contains a seed of light, and perhaps that's what happens when we begin to understand our own pride from this new perspective. Behind the resistance, there is a deep desire to be seen, understood, accepted, but the fear of getting hurt again is so great that this desire ends up hiding. It's as if love wants to enter, but pain still holds the key. And it is at this point that self-knowledge becomes essential, because it helps you understand that self-protection is not the end of the road. It's just a necessary pause before continuing. When you begin to look at yourself with more tenderness, pride naturally dissolves. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You no longer need to justify yourself or hide, and that's when pride transforms into dignity. The same strength that once pushed you away now sustains you, because self-protection matures. It ceases to be a reflection of pain and becomes a conscious choice for peace. And that's a very beautiful point on the soul's journey, when you discover that you can be kind without getting hurt and strong without needing to be cold. When you understand that you can take care of yourself without shutting yourself off from the world. This balance is rare, but when it happens, it completely changes the way you live and relate to others. You begin to approach people not out of neediness, but out of affinity. You start listening more and demanding less. And what was once a need to be understood transforms into tranquility through self-understanding. But before reaching that point, there's a silent path, full of emotional setbacks. Because sometimes, even understanding all of this, you still feel the temptation to shut yourself off again. A thoughtless gesture, a harsh word, an unexpected disappointment, and the mind runs to the old refuge of protection. And that's okay. That's part of it too. Self-protection isn't a mistake. It's a reminder that there's still something inside you that needs care. And maturity doesn't come from denying that need, but from embracing it consciously. When Jung spoke about the individuation process, he said that human beings need to integrate all their parts, even those they consider weak, proud, or excessively sensitive, because the soul doesn't seek perfection, it seeks wholeness. And to be whole is to accept that within you there is love and fear, courage and apprehension, the desire to get closer, and the impulse to protect yourself. None of these parts need to be eliminated. They all play an important role in your inner balance. And perhaps that's what life is trying to teach you when it places you in relationships that demand patience, discernment, and self-control. Each person who comes into your life awakens something different within you. Some show you the power of surrender, others teach you the value of boundaries. Some invite you to open up, others remind you of the importance of self-preservation. And if you look with the eyes of your soul, you will realize that even the relationships that hurt you the most had an important function. They taught you to protect yourself without hardening. There's an ancient saying, "The flower that blooms in winter is the rarest and most beautiful of all." And that's exactly what happens to the soul when it learns to bloom after protecting itself. Because self-protection isn't a wall of ice, it's an inner winter. And like every winter, it has a purpose, to prepare the ground for a new bloom. In the cold of retreat, the soul matures. In the silence of solitude, it takes deeper root. And when the right time comes, it blossoms with a strength that only those who have been broken understand. From that point on, pride ceases to be a label others give you and becomes a symbol of self-knowledge. You understand that in reality, it wasn't pride that made you silent. It was wisdom. It was your soul saying, "Not now." And not now isn't the same as never again. It's simply the time you need to reorganize your baggage, to breathe, to rediscover yourself. And it's amazing how, over time, this awareness begins to transform even the way you see the past. What once hurt now teaches you. What made you feel small now shows you how much you've grown. You begin to see that every time you protected yourself, you were actually choosing yourself. And choosing yourself is never selfishness. It's emotional survival. Jung used to say that true love doesn't negate the individual, it strengthens them. And when you learn to protect yourself wisely, the love that is born from that is different. It is serene, secure, free. You no longer love to be accepted. You love because you have already accepted yourself. You no longer seek someone to complete you, but someone who overflows you. And pride, which was once a defense, transforms into a kind of natural filter that prevents love from being confused with dependence. And it is at this moment that you realize that, instead of being a barrier, self-protection becomes a portal to a new kind of emotional life, where what guides you is no longer the fear of pain, but the genuine desire for peace. You begin to look at relationships more calmly, without rushing to commit, but also without fear of feeling. You learn to listen to what the other person is capable of offering without trying to change anyone. And above all, you learn to distance yourself when you feel that your essence is at risk. This serenity is one of the greatest fruits of self-knowledge. It doesn't come from the absence of pain, but from peacefully coexisting with it. It's when you look at your own scars and realize that although it hurt, you survived, that each time you withdrew, you rebuilt yourself a little more, that even on the days when it seemed cold, what moved you was the desire to preserve the little light that still remained within you. And life, curiously, responds to this energy. When you align yourself with your own rhythm, the universe also reorganizes itself. People who vibrate at the same frequency begin to appear. Lighter relationships, more sincere connections, encounters that don't ask for explanations, just presence. Because when you protect yourself from what destroys you, you create space for what heals you. This is the turning point, the moment when pride completely dissolves and self-protection becomes mature love, the kind of love that isn't driven by neediness, but by choice. The kind of love that understands that being alone is also a way to be at peace. That doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, nor chase after what it doesn't want to achieve. And that's when life changes tone. You can begin to feel lighter, more centered, more aware that not every separation is a loss. Sometimes it's salvation. And this understanding doesn't come from reason, it comes from the soul. It comes from the same place that once made you protect yourself, but now with a different purpose, to live in peace. And perhaps that's what Jung meant when he said, "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens." Because when you begin to look inside honestly, you realize that pride was never the villain of your story. It was merely the guardian of your self-love until you were ready to love consciously again. There comes a moment when everything falls into place, not because the world changes, but because you change the way you see it. Those situations that once made you feel small now serve only as reminders of how much you've grown. The people who mistook your silence for disdain no longer affect you, and what was once a throbbing pain is now just a distant, almost tender memory of a time when you didn't yet know how to protect yourself. It is at this point that life reveals a different kind of beauty, a calmness born from the understanding that not everything needs to be explained, not every bond needs to last, and that distancing yourself is also a way of respecting your own limits. Self-protection, as it matures, ceases to be defense and becomes emotional wisdom. It doesn't pit you against the world. It puts you in favor of yourself. It's as if the soul learns to breathe at a different rhythm, lighter, more serene, more conscious, and you begin to realize that you no longer need to be everywhere, nor respond to every call. You learn to choose with whom it is worthwhile to spend words, energy, and presence. And this choice is not made with resentment, but with love, the tranquil love of someone who has rediscovered themselves. Jung believed that self-knowledge is the path to true inner freedom. And this freedom is born precisely when you stop reacting automatically and start acting consciously. When you understand that you can love without losing yourself, forgive without returning, care without negating yourself. And that is exactly what healthy self-protection teaches. It gives you back the power to choose, to say yes when it makes sense and no when something threatens your peace. To open your heart without giving away the key to everything inside it. That's the beauty of emotional maturity. It makes you realize you no longer need to prove your worth. Those who want to stay will stay for who you are, not for what you offer. And those who leave are simply making room for what is true. Because love, when genuine, doesn't demand that you diminish yourself. It embraces you, expands you, allows you to breathe without fear. And when you understand this, pride loses its meaning. What was once a defense mechanism transforms into a way of existing in peace. But make no mistake, this state of serenity is not the absence of pain. It is the harmonious coexistence with it. It is the understanding that feeling is part of life, but suffering doesn't have to be eternal. You accept what happened, bless what remains, and move on. Because at some point, the heart realizes that holding on to resentment is like trying to keep alive a flame that has already fulfilled its purpose. And letting go is not weakness, it's courage. And perhaps the greatest transformation happens precisely there, the moment you understand that you no longer need to hide behind pride to feel safe, that you can be vulnerable, but without exposing yourself to what hurts you. That you can love again, but with the discernment that time has given you. Self-protection ceases to be a barrier and becomes a healthy boundary, an invisible limit between what wears you down and what nourishes you. From that point on, your presence changes. People notice, even if they can't explain it. There's a different calmness in your gaze, a quiet firmness in your actions. You no longer need to raise your voice to be heard, nor do you need to chase after others to be seen, because the energy of someone who knows themselves speaks for itself. And those who vibrate at that frequency understand true power lies not in imposing oneself, but in being at peace with oneself. And this peace is the gift that comes after the storm. It arrives without fanfare, often on any given late afternoon, when you find yourself taking a deep breath and realize that your chest no longer hurts so much, that the past no longer has the same weight, that the fear of getting hurt no longer paralyzes you. It's the moment when the soul smiles alone, grateful for having survived so many falls, and for still believing in love, not idealized love, but that simple, human, real love that is built with respect and presence. Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And that's what happens. When you find people who deeply respect you, they don't try to forcibly dismantle your defenses. They wait. They touch gently. They understand that your silence is not rejection. It's just a pause. And over time, this kind of presence does something beautiful. It restores your confidence in the relationship. You realize you can lower your guard without fear because there are safe hands on the other side. And that's when life shows you the true purpose of having learned to protect yourself. It wasn't to distance yourself from love. It was to prepare for it. Because mature love isn't born from need, but from choice. And only those who have protected themselves one day know the value of a peaceful love. A love that doesn't demand explanations, that doesn't feed on games, that doesn't ask you to be less. It simply welcomes you, exactly as you are, with your scars and your light. And when you experience this, you understand that everything that came before had a purpose. Every silence, every distance, every night you thought you were alone, it all brought you here. It was self-protection that taught you to listen to yourself. It was pride that forced you to look inward. And it was self-love that guided you back to your essence. Pride then ceases to be something that separates you from others and becomes what keeps you true to yourself. Because in the end, it's not about building walls. It's about knowing who deserves to cross them. And those who understand this begin to live in a lighter, more conscious, more complete way. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Jung wanted to leave us. Everything the soul does, even what we call defense, is a movement toward healing. Nothing within you is by chance. Every withdrawal, every resistance, every silence, everything has a reason, a meaning, a function. And when you begin to look at yourself with this understanding, you stop blaming yourself for protecting yourself. You begin to thank yourself. Ultimately, it was this self-protection that kept you standing when the world seemed to be collapsing. It was what taught you to value your own company. It was what made you discover the value of being at peace, even without anyone else by your side. And it was what, silently, prepared you for a new kind of love, the kind that is born from the meeting of two souls that don't complete each other, but recognize each other. And if you felt every word of this script as if it were a memory of your own, know this: you are not alone in this process. We all, at some point in our lives, need to protect ourselves. What changes is what we do after that. Some close themselves off and remain inside their armor forever. Others, like you, choose to rebuild themselves, and it is this choice that transforms everything. So if these words touch something within you, if this video helped you see your silence with more understanding and less guilt, subscribe to the channel. Here, each reflection is an invitation to look at yourself with more affection, more truth, and more awareness. And if you want, share in the comments what this journey taught you, not about others, but about yourself. Because healing begins when we recognize ourselves in the stories we hear. And remember, protecting yourself was never about pride. It was always about love. Love for who you are becoming, and for everything that can still blossom within you.